Before time began, there was a power that existed in and of itself. The power didn't come from any substance or anything. The power simply was and is. No one could claim they had formed the power. He was just there. You couldn't ask who was his parents because he didn't have any. No one dared to ask who created him, for by him were all things created, that are in heaven and that are in the earth, visible and invisible, whether they be thrones or dominions or principalities or powers. All things were created by him and for him, and he is before all things, and by him all things consist. All things were made through him, and without him was not anything made that was made. In him was life, and the life was the light of men. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness have not overcome it. The earth was without form and void, and darkness was over the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. When God decided to turn off the darkness, we heard him speak for the first time as he cleared his throat and said, "Let there be light." The true light, which gives light to everyone, was coming into the world. He was in the world, and the world was made through him, yet the world did not know him. Jesus said, "Men love darkness because our deeds are evil." There's often something terrifying about darkness. All of our scariest movies, our scariest ghost tales, they all involve a measure of darkness. Think about it. Have you ever seen Freddy Krueger, Michael Myers, Jason operating on a bright, beautiful, sunshining day? Almost all of the time, these hideous figures operate in the dark. The best scary stories, horror stories that are ever told, they're not done in daylight. They're done in the dark. Now here's the thing. When we're in a physical darkness, we always know it. No one has to tell us we're in the physical darkness. Even those who are visually impaired, those who may have suffered from blindness, can discern and detect the difference of when they're in the light and when they're in a dark place. But we can be in the dark spiritually, and the scary thing about it is not even know it. When you're in the darkness, you don't know where you are. Why? Because you're lost. But in being in the darkness and being lost is part of knowing that you're lost. Because you're lost, you don't know that you're lost. And there's nothing harder than seeing your own darkness. But what is more difficult is admitting to yourself, not to those who are around you, because those around you, you want them to believe you're in the light. But to admit it to yourself is the first point of dealing with the darkness. And that's what I want to talk to you about tonight. Sitting in the dark. Spiritual darkness. As we quickly approach the celebration, the commemoration of the birth of the Christ, I want to start today talking about sitting in the dark. Now, there are many people online today on different platforms. You're in this virtual sanctuary who are sitting in some kind of darkness tonight. Right at this very moment as we gather here, there are many of you who are sitting in the dark and don't even know it. Because darkness is not just a physical place. You can be in the spiritual dark place because you don't sense the presence of God in your life. That you're not conscious of who He is, nor can you feel the power of God in your life. Darkness is not just a physical place, but darkness can be an addiction. Addiction to illegal substance, an addiction to even food, addiction to what you watch on TV, addiction to gambling, addiction to the need of always needing to be approved, addiction of worshiping yourself. Darkness is not just shown in addictions, but we can be in emotional darkness. A darkness of anger, of bitterness, of resentment, that we can't move on from what happened to us yesterday, that we can't move on from what happened to us last week, a month ago, years ago. And people have gone on with their lives, but here we sit in the darkness of anger, in the darkness of bitterness, in the darkness of resentment. Darkness can also be an illness, where sickness has ravaged our bodies, and we sit there carrying around a sickness that no, we didn't ask for the sickness. The sickness asked for us, and there we sit in the dark. For some of us, darkness can be loneliness. But it seems like nobody wants to be with me. Nobody calls me. Nobody invites me. Then I don't have friendship. I don't have relationship. And so there we sit in the darkness of loneliness. Oh, we got some type of darkness. For some of us, we lost our hope. That we're just going on with life with the same routine. And we don't hope anything to get better. So we're sitting in the darkness of hopelessness. That we lost our sense of hope. At one time we wish things would get better, but it didn't get better, and so we don't hope anymore. We're just existing. We're numb to the situation, that nothing fazes us now. Nothing bothers us anymore. If they hit me, I don't cry anymore because I'm numb and I'm dealing in the darkness of hopelessness. If they cut me, I see the blood running, but it doesn't affect me because I got used to the pain. I'm sitting in the place of darkness. Oh, it used to bother me when it first happened, but I got so accustomed to the pain that I just sit there as if it doesn't even bother me. The Bible describes a world of darkness before Christ. In Isaiah chapter 9, verse 1 and 2, the prophet writes, "Nevertheless, the gloom will not be upon her who is distressed. As when at first he lighted extinct the land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali, and afterward more heavily oppressed her by the way of the sea, beyond the Jordan in Galilee of the Gentiles. It goes on to say in verse 2 that the people who walked in darkness have seen a great light. Those who dwelt in the land of the shadow of death, upon them a light has shined. But the author of Matthew was not going to allow the prophet to just prophesy without sharing with us his interpretation, his revelation of what the prophet prophesied. In Matthew chapter 4, verse 15 and 16, Matthew says, the land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali, by the way of the sea, beyond the Jordan, the Galilee of the Gentiles, the people, here it is, which sat in darkness, saw a great light. And to them which sat in the region and shadow of death, light is sprung up. Sitting in the dark. I want you to know this, that in Isaiah 9:1, that the prophet says, the land of Zebulun and Naphtali. Years before this prophecy, shortly after the death of one of Israel's greatest king, wisest king, King Solomon, 10 of the tribes of Israel rebelled against their king. And there was a divide, there was a split off to form a new nation that was called Israel in the north, while the remaining 2 tribes in the south became known as Judah. Zebulun and Naphtali were 2 of those 10 tribes in the north. They were in the northern nation of Israel, but they were relatively insignificant tribes. Insignificant. You know, when you're in the dark, that's what it feels like. You feel insignificant, that nobody understands. So Naphtali and Zebulun, they are rarely ever mentioned anywhere inside of the Old Testament. And they are hardly never spoken of as having any important role of anything inside of the Bible. That is, until God mentioned them here in Isaiah chapter 9. I want you to remember that there are only 10 tribes in the northern part of Israel, or in northern Israel, that God had included in connection with the coming Messiah. The Bible lets us know that Jesus, yes, we know that Jesus was born in Bethlehem, just south of Jerusalem, just south of the border, in the land of Judah. But the Bible says Herod, that old Herod, King Herod, when he learned about the prophecy of a king being born in Bethlehem, Herod wasn't too happy about that. He saw this new king as a threat to his own throne. And since he was a threat, Herod, being as clever and as dark as he was, sought to kill him. But I'm so grateful that the child had parents who could dream. And in a dream, Joseph and Mary fled with the child to another dark place. You know that place. It's called Egypt. For out of Egypt have I called you. And he was to remain there until King Herod died. A king in protective custody. He's in a dark place, yet he's in protective custody. And once the threat was removed, he came out of Egypt and returned to their own home. But not their home in Bethlehem. No, they didn't return to Bethlehem. They had left that place years before. The Bible says the home they returned to was in Nazareth. And Nazareth was in the region of Galilee. Now this is what is fulfilling for me and to us. The Galilee is near the two towns. Yes, that Isaiah prophesied by. They were near the towns of Zebulun and Naphtali. And so he writes, or Matthew writes in his gospel, he writes the land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali, which is Naphtali, by the way of the sea beyond the Jordan, Galilee of the Gentiles. People which sat in darkness, they saw a great light. And to them which sat in the region in the shadow of death, light is sprung up. It's important for us to understand in this season that in the day of Jesus, Galilee, the land of Zebulun and Naphtali, was considered, here it is, a very dark land. It was a backwater region where only the poor and only the uneducated would dare take up residence. It wasn't an area where people were enlightened, where people were studying Plato and Socrates and Euripides, but it was a place where poverty ran amok. There was a place where there wasn't no time for someone to drop out of school because there was no school. So then when Peter and John spoke before the Sanhedrin Council in Acts chapter 4, they were amazed that the leaders of Judah, they were amazed at these leaders because they was obviously Galileans. They were from Naphtali and Zebulun and Naphtali, and they were unschooled. They were uneducated. They were ordinary men, but yet they spoke with courage and they spoke with power. No degrees, no education, no formal training, from a dark region, but yet they spoke with courage and power. Galilean's reputation was such that when Philip told Nathanael that he had found the Messiah, yes, Philip told, I found the Messiah, Nathanael exclaimed, here's the question, can anything good come out of Nazareth? Now isn't all of that interesting? The Galilee was the area once inhabited by Zebulun and Naphtali. I got three things I want to say to you tonight. That when Jesus began his ministry, he resided at Capernaum in Galilee. Whew, help me tonight. What am I saying to you tonight? That when God decided to begin ministry, he began it in a dark place. You would have never known Jesus. I would have never known Jesus except I had experienced darkness before in my life. And I just wanted to take the time tonight to thank him for coming to me in my most darkest moments when I couldn't see my way out. He showed up. When I couldn't crawl my way out, he showed up. When I had no flashlight, no candle to burn, he showed up. That we know God better. Because we've been in a dark situation. We have experienced him better. Because we've known darkness. Men love darkness because their deeds are evil. And because we love the darkness, he showed up in our darkness. And while we sat there in the darkness, I want to say to us tonight, God pulled a seat over and he sat next to us. And because he sits with me in the dark, that I don't have to be afraid of what can happen to me in the dark. The anger that I may deal with. Because he's next to me. He's sitting next to me in the dark. I know he can give me peace. The sickness that we deal with. Because we got a healer that sits in the dark. We don't have to be terrified by sickness. The loneliness that we experience in the dark. We don't have to feel alone. For we have Jehovah Shammah, who decided his first presentation, his first presence inside of the earth was to be present with us in the dark. He decided to be present with us in our emotional darkness, where we've been all over the place, emotional unbalance. We have someone who's sitting next to us in the dark of our emotionalism, and he's able to speak peace to us. There it is. In the midst of our emotional darkness. And so he began in the dark. And not only did he begin, the Bible said he resided there. He lived there. That he said, I'm not leaving this place until I get you out the dark. That I'm not leaving this darkness until I bring you out. So this Christmas season, we don't just sit around in the darkness and not knowing that we have a great high priest who can be touched with the feelings of our infirmities. It was in the darkness that he became even more light to us. There was in the darkness where he became brighter to us. Can I just stop for a moment tonight and praise him for the dark? Yes, even in the dark, we got to give him glory. Because if it had not been for the dark, we would have never seen the star. If it had not been for the dark, we would have never seen him. But because we sat in darkness, we got to experience him. No, the darkness of sin, the darkness of the flesh, because we sat in it, he pulled a chair up and said, I'm not going to let you sit here by yourself. I feel Jesus. And so I want to say to you, when Jesus began his ministry, he resided in Capernaum, in the Galilean area, and he sat in the dark. So they asked the question, can anything good come out of darkness? Can anything good come from an uneducated region? I want to say to you that ignorance is darkness. He said, my people perish for the lack of knowledge, ignorance, for being in the dark. When you don't know what's going on, the slogan is, I was in the dark on that one. But he stepped in the dark. So I don't have to remain ignorant. Somebody need to hear that tonight. That he sat there in the dark. So you wouldn't have to live in ignorance. He sat there in the dark to reignite your imagination. Let me help you. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And the earth was void and without, it was without form and it was void. And the Spirit of God hovered above the face of the deep. And in the midst of the darkness, God said, let there be light. What am I saying to you? That imagination came alive in the dark. That God sat next to you in the dark. He pulled a chair up to you next to the dark to reignite your imagination. Now you can imagine yourself out of this dark situation. I'm trying to talk to us tonight that I don't care how dark it is in your life, because you got imagination, you can see your way out of the dark. Help me, Jesus. The second thing I want to say to you tonight is that it was in Galilee, the dark region, that Jesus, here it is, performed his first miracle. Miracles only take place in the dark. We would have not known his miraculous power if we hadn't sat in the dark. The woman with the issue of blood, this was her darkness. And when she touched out, she hit the light switch. Oh, and the light came on. The man who sat at the pool called Bethesda for 38 years in darkness, he said, I had no one to help me to turn on the light. But Jesus asked the question, do you want the light to be turned on? And he said, take up your bed. And he took up the bed and the light came on. I hope you can hear miracles take place when it's dark. That even the young father who brought their child to Jesus and the demon would convulse and throw him down on the ground, Jesus rebuked the mute spirit that tormented him. And he was clothed in his right mind. Because when he sat in darkness, Mark chapter 5, the considering demoniac who lived among the tombs, that it was so dark for him, he lived with dead people. But when Jesus stepped off of the boat, the light came on. And he began to say, well, the demons began to say, what do we have to do with you? We operate better at dark. And the miracle came. Jesus cast the spirits out, and the man was clothed in his right mind. He was in a dark place, but God gave him his mind back. He was in the dark place, but he got a miracle. And I pray if you're in a dark place, that you see the miraculous power of God in the darkness. So when I'm in the dark, then I should expect a miracle. When I'm in the dark, I should be looking for miracles, because God operates best, here it is, when he's in the dark. Miracles are better when they're in the dark. Third thing I want to say to you. Yes, number one, when Jesus began his ministry, he pulled a chair up next to us and sat there in the dark, a place called Capernaum in Galilee. The second thing is that Jesus performed his first miracle in a dark place. Here's the third thing I want to say to you. It was in Galilee that Jesus called, appointed, picked out the majority of his 12 disciples. I hope you're ready for this tonight. Many of us would have never found our calling unless we were in a dark situation. You didn't know you had that in you until you got into a dark situation. It was out of the darkness, the Bible says, that he called you into his marvelous light. So in the dark season of your life, I want you to understand it's the season you ought to be expecting to hear God call you out of darkness into his marvelous light. Many of us wouldn't know we had what we had in us unless we got convicted when we're in a dark place. It was a dark place that drove out what was in us, and God called us from a dark place. I thank God tonight for those who are watching and viewing that whatever darkness that you sin in, I want to say to you tonight is that you got a calling on your life. That's the reason the enemy wants you to just sit there. That's the reason the enemy wants you to live there, because that devil knows if you stay there in darkness, you won't operate in your calling. But I got news for the devil. It was in the darkness when we discovered who we were. It was in the darkness where we discover who we are. And so I want to thank God tonight that he uses the darkness. Isaiah said that darkness is not dark to him. There it is. And because it's not dark to him, we discover, or we got our calling, our appointment when we were in the dark. It was in the dark. I want to say this to you as my last point and my concluding point. I hope so. That the fourth point is that it was in a dark region, Galilee, that he first resided in, took a chair and sat next to us. It was in Galilee that he performed his first miracle. It was in Galilee where he chose, appointed, and called and purposed majority of his disciples. And fourthly, it was in Galilee that Jesus spent most of his time preaching and teaching and performing all types of healing and miracles. What does that have to say to you during this Christmas season? Why am I talking to you about Jesus performing miracles and preaching and teaching during most of his ministry in the darkness? Because that which God have called you to do, you're going to be more effective dealing with folks who are in darkness. For those who are already in the light don't need more light. Those who are already healed don't need a physician. That your calling that you have on your life is to deal with those who are in the darkness. And I know it's easy to go around people who already believe, but can you believe that God is calling you to help deal with folks who are sitting in a dark place? And because you've been depressed before, you know what it feels like to be depressed. So you can pull the chair next to somebody who's depressed and say, girlfriend, brother, you don't have to be depressed. Me and Jesus are going to sit here with you until we get you out of this dark situation. You know what it means like to have anger to just take over, and because you've been angry, you can sit next to your brother and say, brother, I've been there and I know the consequences if you if you act on that anger, if you let the sun go down on your anger. I know the consequences, that it will eat away at you, and because I've been there, God have sent me here to minister to you, and I'm going to sit with you through this anger. No, I'm not going to allow you to go out of that door, because I know if you go out of that door, you're going to do some crazy thing, because when you're angry, you can't think right. And so I'm going to sit here with you until you get your mind back. That's what God is doing in your ministry, that since you've been in darkness, you have to spend most of your time dealing with folks, pulling them out of darkness into his marvelous light. That's what ministry is all about, pulling people out of darkness into his marvelous light. So when there's sickness, let the elders of the church come and lay hands on them that they can be sick. Pull them out of that darkness. He says, the any among you who are sick, call for the elders that they may lay hands on them and bring them up out of that sickness. That is a darkness. And because I've been there before, I know what it feels like. Brother, I'm going to sit next to you. Family, I'm going to sit next to you, and we're going to come out of this debt, because God has made us the head and not the tail. So I want to say to you, because he sat with us in the darkness, because we experienced his miracles in the darkness, and because he spent most of his ministry in the darkness, and because he chose and appointed us in the darkness, I want to say to you tonight that Jesus literally brought his light, the light of his ministry, into a people who live in a dark land, a land that's called Zebulun and Naphtali. Zebulun and Naphtali. And so you got a choice to make this evening. How you respond to the darkness. There's four things you can do to respond to the darkness. You either can ignore it and act like you're not in the dark. You can deny it as if it never existed. You can compensate for or overcompensate for it. And because you will overcompensate for it, you will do things that's costing you your energy and your time. Or fourthly, you can admit it. Tonight, you have a choice to make.